The Ivey Foundation 4 or 5 years ago decided that we needed to take a different approach to our philanthropy. And if we wanted to make serious systemic change at scale, and we wanted to see Canada as a more sustainable society, a low carbon economy in Canada, then we had to look at what is the role of sustainable finance. And so that really meant we had to shift what we do and work with different people, look at whether it's the finance sector in a mainstream way, investing in things, what are the government institutions that might be funding things differently, and how do we build the capacity in Canada to support those kinds of shifts and those kinds of decisions. I think you need to be courageous to take on climate change, and certainly 5 years ago in Canada it was particularly courageous because there were a lot of forces against us. And really, I think one thing that I'm proud of that the Ivey Foundation, together with our partners, were able to do is imagine a future where it wasn't so challenging. And what were the pieces that we needed to build to get to the point of actually having an opportunity to make change. And I think in Canada we really have shown that we can be a model for democracy and for consensus building and collaboration. And those are all values that are very strongly held by the Ivey Foundation right through our board and the family. I find often in philanthropy there will be approaches that are very specific, like we fund education, or we fund activists, or we fund scientists, or we fund business collaboration. And I think what we do at the Ivey Foundation is fund all of those things around a particular problem and get them working together. And I think that really is how you help manage risk in the long term. If you're going to be taking on these issues, and especially when it gets to the point of working very, very closely with a group of critical partners, I mean, you have to all be very honest with each other about what's working and what's not working. How do your operations reflect your values and your beliefs versus versus just say looking at a really smart strategy with really smart people? And it's that balance that I think we need to ask ourselves in philanthropy, and that's where you get to some of the trickier and slightly more uncomfortable questions. There's this kind of tension between wanting to lead, as in, here are the ideas that we have, you should be supporting our ideas, versus consensus, which is, here's a whole bunch of people in a room hoping that an idea pops up somewhere. And you really have to be working in between those two. We need a movement that has people who don't look like us, who don't think like us, who maybe don't even like us, but they got to be there. And that's the harder part. And I think, to be honest, I don't think philanthropy does a very good job of that one. What we've seen in the past is a lot of conversation about social finance and a lot of questions about what is social finance. I think now it's time for people to get together and really understand, what does it look like when it starts to happen? And what are the different variations of social finance? And so one thing that we were very active in supporting is something called the Fiscal Commission in Canada, which is basically a group of blue chip economists who came together to figure out how to do a better job of pricing environmental externalities. And what's interesting, and we looked at different models around the world, and what's interesting with this one, it's not what they say. None of this is new. None of these ideas are new. It's who is saying it, how are they saying it, what messages are being delivered, and what's the strategy around getting that information into the right people. And that's the fascinating piece. So we're going to do a case study on Canada's Fiscal Commission, which I think is a very exciting example. So at the end of the day, this is a program for students. And so we need to really figure out, what are we going to learn from the students and what are the students going to learn from us? And I think from my perspective, given the caliber of the people that are going to be attending this program, I'm hoping that I'll be learning as much from them as they will be from the work that I'll be talking about. And I think specifically, how do the cultures and the politics change what you do and how you do things? And so I'm just really interested to hear from students, particularly from other countries, what is it within their country that they struggle with from a political and cultural perspective, as opposed to from, say, a strategic or physical or idea perspective. One of the things that we've been looking at is how do you actually motivate people to want to be supportive of your agenda. And right now, we still live in this world where there's a conflict between jobs versus the environment. And so a big part of the work that we're doing in Canada is how do you put those together? So it's not jobs versus environment, it's jobs and environment. But that has to be real. And right now, that's a hard thing to figure out. I mean, no one can really figure out the future of jobs. If we have an economy where 30% of the people are working in the fossil fuel sector, and there are people saying there won't be a fossil fuel sector in 50 years, 100 years, where do those people work? Where are the new jobs? So part of what we think is really critical is how do you create the vision to get to a future that's a low carbon economy? And then what is the pathway to that vision? What does it actually look like? What are the different scenarios? How do you understand the choices that you have to make? And ultimately, what does it mean for the economy and what does it mean for jobs? And I would say that's probably the hardest thing that we're grappling with right now. And that's something that I would love to hear other perspectives on around the world.